So I want to talk to you guys today we're going to talk about the pandemic and lockdowns and how it's changed the way that myself as a professional dog trainer and canine behaviour specialist, how it's changed the way that I've had to coach people. Now, I'll give you just a little bit of context so that you understand this, because we have a lot of people follow along from all across the world. Here in Melbourne, Victoria, where we're based, we've had over 200 days of lockdown since the pandemic began. We're actually in a lockdown right now, very strict lockdown. And, you know, this has produced a ton of consequence across society. We have droves of small businesses going out of business. We have people that are really stressed out because the way that our government has set up the aid packages, or at least according to my very highly paid accountant, is extremely poorly designed. So people aren't getting the help that they need. People are stuck at home working, and they've also got to educate their kids at home. And then of course people are losing their jobs. And on top of all of that, all their outlets from stress are greatly affected. So with that little bit of context, I have to look at the way that I interact with my clients differently. One of my dearest friends in the world, 𝘂𝘁𝘁. So Louky's constantly, he's my go-to for strength and conditioning. And he's constantly sort of preaching to me about, you have to consider stress across the entirety of your life and all facets of your life. And just as an example, it's not unknown for Lukey. He's a very high-end, very athletic guy, very strong, very fit. And it's not at all abnormal if he happens to have really bad sleep, he won't train the next day. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, but it illustrates the premise that I'm talking about. So, with very few exceptions, the clients that I deal with, they are not coming to our sessions in an optimal state. One wonderful client of mine, she was actually quite relieved to be getting involved in some dog training, because she has 2 young kids at home, and her husband are working from home, right? And it's a pretty hectic place, but that gives you a bit of an example about some of what people are going through. And so very often as a coach, well, always as a coach, part of what I'm working with a person and I'm working with a dog, and ideally that person's working with the dog, but I'm helping them to do it. And so I need to consider the human that I'm coaching. Ultimately, the human is the primary canvas, right? So it's very often the case that, like if it was in-person training, right, at a time when that's been allowed, it's very often the case that I'll have people come in, maybe make them a coffee, maybe get a glass of water, and we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes talking before we actually start a session, because it gives me a little bit of a bead on where people are at. You know, very often people will share, you know, this isn't going well and that's going well. And it helps me register in my mind what's going on for them, and then I can watch their performance. And if I find that their performance is off, if their timing's off, if we're teaching something new and they're just not getting it, I can scale the training back and I can pick an exercise where they can be successful, bring the joy back into the session, instead of just bombarding them with trying to give them things that are inaccessible to them on that day. Because very often these stressed out people can't do a great job on that day, even though they've done a great job on many other days with the exact same exercise. So if you want to be a coach for people, you need to consider these things. When someone's under a lot more stress, like in a general sense from life, well, really it's not all that different to someone coming in with a dog whose behaviour is extremely problematic, and that stresses that person out. And as a dog training coach, if you're not considering these things, right, you shouldn't be fucking doing it, right? So this is so pervasive, it even comes out in the inquiries that I get for coaching during these times. I had one lovely lady who I'm actually now working with, and she was super sort of sparky in her email, and she had all these odd questions, and she seemed a little combative, and luckily on that particular day I was able to answer with a little bit of compassion and understanding and remained attached. And she actually came back to me with an email. She said, "I'm actually really sorry. I've had a really rough week." And I'm like, "Hey man, that's cool. We're all having rough weeks." But yeah, it's a consideration that those in the industry need to make. It's something that we need to do mindfully. And I think that there is really potential there for this, because we have to look for silver linings right now, right? So there really is potential there for this to positively impact the way that we all coach. Because it's ultimately, like if you're in strength and conditioning like Lukey is, you know, he's dealing with an athlete. My athletes are canine and human, and ultimately I want them to perform well. And so we really need to, perhaps this is the shift towards us trying to understand our clients a little better, not just what they want with their dog, also who they are and what they're capable of on that day. And for those that are newer to the game, it's going to be an interesting time for you to come to understand these things, because, you know, I've been teaching people things in a paid capacity since I was like 16 years old. So, you know, it's a little bit second nature to me, for better and for worse. That's where some of my bad habits come from as a coach. But yeah, hopefully this will be a step forward for the industry. People can start looking at both sides of the human-dog equation with equal levels of import. And yeah, that's the end of my thought for today. Who knows, maybe I'll even publish this. Take care.